Meowstic Male almost always uses the ability Prankster to give priority to his status moves, guaranteeing he can use various supporting moves before the opponent can act. So why did I choose to run a Meowstic Male without Prankster? Being one of my favorite Pokemon, I wanted to see what I could cook up for him in the Regulation H format, and I settled on a set running the move Imprison alongside Expanding Force and Trick Room. Imprison is a move that once used while the user is on the field, blocks other Pokemon from using moves that they know. In this case, Trick Room and Expanding Force. And even if they try to click those moves the turn Imprison is used, as long as Meowstic moves first, the moves won't work. But that sounds pretty good to pair with Prankster, so why go with Infiltrator instead? Well, if you're keeping count, Meowstic still has one open move slot that we haven't talked about yet. A move slot that I ultimately used for the move Fake Tears. Fake Tears is a move that lowers a Pokemon's special defense stat by 2 stages, essentially doubling the power of any special attacks that connect. This would potentially fix a problem I found in testing against the teams I had built him to counter. Meowstic on his own doesn't exert that much offensive pressure, and it was hard to break through the defenses of a lot of the Pokemons that are common on Trick Room teams before they began to KO Meowstic or his partner. Enter Fake Tears. But therein lies the problem. Many Trick Room teams are using Indeedee, who sets up the Psychic Terrain, which of course buffs Expanding Force, but also has an effect that protects all grounded Pokemon on the field from being hit by opposing priority moves. And Prankster would make Fake Tears a priority move. Meowstic is already a relatively fast Pokemon in Regulation Age, and Trick Room users are generally slow, so I figured he would probably get his moves off against most targets anyways. At this point, you may be wondering, if I wasn't running Prankster, why not just run Meowstic Female instead, for competitive, which is good against the common ability Intimidate? Well, I did think of that, but Meowstic Female doesn't actually learn Imprison, and thus was born the idea to try Meowstic Male without Prankster. Was it a good idea? Maybe not, but it led to a lot of interesting battles. So if you're interested, please check out the full video. You guys heard the intro. Espurr and Meowstic are 2 of my favorite Pokemon, so I had to try this. These are matches from the 2026 Grand Challenge 1, which happened back in September of 2025, not in 2026, even though it's called Grand Challenge 2026. But either way, for this first match that we're showcasing, we have a Sunroom team who has a speedy fast mode with Chlorophyll, Jumpluff, and Charizard, but of course also a Trick Room mode with scary sweepers like Torkoal and Ursaluna. We have ways to counteract both of those things with Pelipper for the Weather War, but of course also Meowstic for the Trick Room. So we are going to lead off with our Meowstic and Ninetales. It may seem a little counterintuitive to set up the Sun for them, but what I think I was thinking at the time was that I would rather have Pelipper in the back in case they led Torkoal, and I didn't want to put Charizard in danger too early since it's our main damage dealer. There is a future version of this team where I improved the Weather War aspect a bit, but that is a story for another time. Though, if that is something that interests you, feel free to subscribe, we would greatly appreciate it. But in this game, we are just going to go straight for the Imprison on Meowstic to try and stop Trick Room from Porygon 2, and begin to get damage into their P2 with Ninetales, given that I can't really touch Incineroar right now. The Weather Ball doesn't do much damage unfortunately, and Incineroar is actually going to forgo the Fake Out and go straight for knockoff into Ninetales, which, to be honest, aside from them using Fake Out into my Covert Cloak Meowstic, was probably the best case scenario for us, as the P2 does get absolutely bamboozled by our Imprison. And with P2, Incin, and presumably Torkoal in the back, all slow mons that rely on Trick Room, I'm feeling pretty good about this position. Next order of business, we are going to Fake Tears Weather Ball into that P2 slot. They could switch out into a Fire type, but I feel that Sun boosted -2 Spadef Weather Ball is going to do pretty solid damage to whoever is in that slot, as they actually do stay in, maybe expecting to be safe because of how little the first Weather Ball did, or just not wanting to risk the switch. But either way, scenarios like these is why Fake Tears is so good, as I was talking about in the intro. Incin clicks knockoff into Meowstic, leaving me with very little HP, but had the knockoff KO'd, or had I not been able to pick up the KO on P2 when I did, and they double attacked Meowstic, they would have then had access to Trick Room again. They bring in the Torkoal here, and they have 2 Fire types who are both resistant to Weather Ball, but given how bulky Incin is, I'm going to Fake Tears Weather Ball into Torkoal to try to weaken a potential Eruption. But to be honest, without Trick Room up, Eruption is not that threatening, and I probably should have just switched in Pelipper in that Meowstic slot either way, but it actually kind of works out as we see the eject pack on Torkoal, meaning we force in the Ursaluna, and not only is that guy going to take big damage from Weather Ball, but also we stop presumably the overheat from the Torkoal. We do get the crit, unfortunately, but now we've seen all 4 of their mons, and my opponent was committed to that Trick Room mode this game. So Meowstic being able to stop the Trick Room and help KO the Porygon 2, and then accidentally forcing out the Torkoal was definitely MVP this game. Although to be fair, on that last point, forcing out the Torkoal may have been a bit awkward because we still had Pelipper in the back, and I probably had a better play with getting in that Pelipper earlier. Which, speaking of Pelipper, we do finally bring her in here, with my thought being, this Ursaluna is pretty much useless right now because of how slow she is. Shoutouts to Meowstic. So I'm probably going to be able to either pick up a KO on someone here or get free damage on a Torkoal switch in. They are actually going to stay in with both their mons, and we see no protect from Ursa, so she's going down here, and Incineroar is pretty tanky, but super effective. Rain boosted stab Weather Ball is ridiculously strong. So we pick up the KO there as well, effectively ending the game. I think my opponent could have made things interesting with maybe a protect on Ursa and switching in Torkoal or something like that, which is why me putting in Pelipper with Torkoal still in the back was maybe not the greatest play, but this time it does work out for us, and all we have to do here is switch out our Pelipper into Charizard to be able to reset our Rain, and knowing that, our opponent concedes. As for this next game, we once again see a potential Trick Room mode with the Porygon 2. Ursaluna, Blood Moon, and Amoonguss also quite like to operate under Trick Room, so I'm like, let's go ahead and try this Meowstic out again. However, they actually throw us for a loop because they have a potential Tailwind fast mode that they decide to lead instead, and Meowstic is now sitting in a pretty awkward spot. I think it's relatively likely that they go for a Scale Shot into Ninetales, so a potential switch into Tinkaton in that slot would be kind of nice. And if they did that, I would also then be able to go for an Encore on the Gholdengo if they decide to Nasty Plot. I also have a potential Weather Ball into that Gholdengo slot, but of course they have the option to go for a defensive Terra Water, for example. So because of that and Meowstic not really doing much in this situation, I ultimately felt it better to just try to get the Will-O-Wisp off and cripple this Dragonite and switch Meowstic into Tinkaton instead. If they do click Tailwind, I won't be able to Encore fast enough, but they instead actually look for the super effective Shadow Ball into my Meowstic and click Dragon Dance on their Dragonite. That could have been potentially pretty scary, but that burn does come in clutch here. I of course have that fake out pressure here, but if that Dragonite is inner focus, I wouldn't be able to flinch it, and given Meowstic doesn't seem to be doing amazing in this game anyways, I go ahead and decide to switch him back in and potentially sack him. Dragonite goes for a second D-Dance, which is fine. He's only back to his regular attack because of the burn. And we don't see the defensive Terra on gold, so that's actually the best case scenario for us, because we preserve the Tinkaton for Fake Out and his defensive typing versus Dragonite in the back, and get rid of a massive threat, and of course, we get in the GOAT Meowstic for free. Interestingly enough, in comes the Porygon 2 right here, and of course, my first thought at the time was probably, hey, I can click Imprison again. But thinking on it some more, with Dragonite as fast as he is right now, I wouldn't really mind Trick Room going up, and I don't know that they would want Trick Room to go up either. So we're actually just going to go for the Fake Tears Weather Ball combo here instead. Dragonite does go for that Scale Shot, and luckily they only connect on 4 hits, which is massive because that allows us to live with the Ninetales and then get off big damage into the Porygon 2. P2 does end up taking us out with that Terra Blast, but I don't think that's the worst trade in the world. Here, I opt to go back into the Tinkaton, looking to get a knockoff on loaded dice to cripple Dragonite even more, which I figured was a relatively safe option to try to play for because I am immune to Scale Shot and I resist Extreme Speed. But they actually revealed the Fire Punch of all things, which was quite surprising. It wasn't even like the Stomping Tantrum that did me in, but the Fire Punch instead. So Tinkaton goes down. Luckily though, I am able to still pick up the KO on Porygon with Expanding Force. Shoutouts to Meowstic, by the way, for actually getting a KO in this video. And ultimately, Dragonite is still burned, so we're probably still in a fine spot. Our last mon is going to be the Pelipper, and in the back, they have that Ursaluna Blood Moon, which is definitely a very scary threat. In this position, I opt to split my attacks, seeing that they do have the potential Protect or Terra on the bear. I also do want to get rid of this Dragonite because I ultimately do outspeed the Ursaluna with both of my Mon, because of course the GOAT Meowstic once again was able to deal with the Trick Room Setter, this time with his fists, or rather his mind I guess. And as we talked about, out comes that Terra Normal, of course getting rid of that water weakness on the Ursaluna, and Dragonite is able to connect on another Scale Shot. Personally, I believe that every opposing Dragonite deserves to miss Scale Shots against me, but they do hit this one. They are going to hit 4 times here on the Scale Shot, and judging by the damage, I don't think a 5th one would have KO'd, but you never know, right? You can get a crit on that last one. Luckily though, we are able to live. Like I said, we split the attacks, the Fake Tears goes into the bear, and Pelipper is able to trade that damage from the Scale Shot with a KO on the Hurricane, taking out the Dragonite. And here, a critical decision on our opponent's part, as they actually decide to Blood Moon our Meowstic, basically saying, okay, this cat putting in too much work, we're just going to vaporize it with our mind, which is neat, but potentially could have been a slight misplay on their part, because Hyper Voice probably does pick up the Pelipper from this range. And I don't think Meowstic had the damage to 1v1 the Ursaluna, but they do not go for that play, so it comes down to this last 1v1. Can Pelipper get this one shot with the Weather Ball? I Terra Ghost here, probably forgetting about Mind's Eye, which is bad because it actually makes us weaker to Vacuum Wave. But they don't go for that, and we let the Weather Ball fly. It does actually pick up the KO. Shoutouts once again to Meowstic, leaving us with a -2 Spadef parting gift before he went out. That essentially made that Weather Ball a super effective move, even though they teared out of the weakness. We haven't yet shown off a game where we face off not just against the Trick Room team, but also a Psychic Terrain Expanding Force team, so here we have one. They have a very clear Trick Room mode, with 2 potential Trick Room setters in the Porygon 2 and Indeedee, but also the fast mode with Psychic Seed, Unburden, Sneasler. We also see the Amoonguss, so I'm going to lead off with my Meowstic to potentially stop Trick Room, and Ninetales to potentially stop Espurr from Amoonguss. They, unfortunately, do not go with the Amoonguss, but they do lead off with the classic Sneasler and Indeedee combo. Trick Room is not really a huge factor here because they massively outspeed me with Sneasler, but I am going to try to go for the Terra Dark on Meowstic to live a potential Throat Chop from Sneasler and go for Imprison, which can still shut off the Expanding Force from Indeedee. The cool part is that afterwards I can still threaten with my own Expanding Force using their Psychic Terrain against them. I technically could have just gone for the Expanding Force turn 1, but it just felt like such an obvious play, to the point that I decided it was probably safer to just try and stop the Expanding Force with Imprison, given Meowstic should be faster than Indeedee. Sneasler though is just going to go for the Dire Claw into Ninetales, and Indeedee actually shows itself to be Choice Scarf. So it does outspeed both my Mons, which is bad, because Ninetales goes down without being able to accomplish much. But at least Meowstic is able to get off the Imprison, and with Indeedee being Choice Scarfed, we know now that they are locked into using a move that they cannot use next turn. With Sneasler being as fast as he is right now, we're just going to go into the Pelipper to try to leverage our Focus Sash, knowing we can live at least 1 hit. I try to make a prediction here, and switch our Meowstic into Charizard to take a close combat, and allow our Pelipper to get big damage into Sneasler. By switching out Meowstic, we are going to be giving Indeedee access to his moves again, but I figure there's no way they stay in on that slot due to the Imprison, and Sneasler would probably want to get rid of Meowstic as soon as possible. As expected, they do switch that Indeedee out into Porygon 2 as we go ahead and switch out Meowstic. It's unfortunate that we burned our Terra for a Throat Chop that never came, and that made us weaker to close combat, so that was probably a misplay on my part, but we do bring in the Charizard, and my opponent is finally going to commit that Terra on Sneasler, which, by the way, because they did not Terra turn 1, I actually could have just clicked the Expanding Force and just completely blown it out of existence. Maybe they didn't expect me to have a Psychic move, or they thought I would go for screens, or they knew I'd fear the defensive option, but in any case, they make a great play and Dire Claw into my Pelipper, meaning my read does not work out. Luckily, they only get the poison, so we are still able to get off the Hurricane, but it doesn't do that much damage due to the Psychic Seed. I know they probably don't have a way to KO Charizard before he can attack this turn, so I feel relatively safe throwing out an attack into that slot, but they go for that Dire Claw, so I do still have to hope that I don't get slept or full para. Luckily, I do not, so we are able to get rid of this huge threat in the Sneasler. Pelipper can then get some nice chip into Porygon 2, but it delivers a Tera Blast right back at us and very wisely takes out our Pelipper, who of course has the threat of Wide Guard to stop Expanding Force from Indeedee in the back. And that does put us in a pretty rough spot. We still have one final stand with Meowstic. If we can get this Imprison off, maybe we can stop them from running away with this game. But once again, very smart play by the opponent, putting in Indeedee in this spot. Because he is Choice Scarfed, he threatens to KO Charizard before I can stop him with Imprison. So with that in mind, I opt to just go for my own Expanding Force instead. It is looking pretty hopeless, but if they misplay, I can maybe potentially make something happen. But actually, they end up showing off the Imprison on their own Indeedee and completely flip the script on us. Shoutouts to Pheasantipity EX for all of my TCG guys out there. Amazingly enough though, that play actually gives us a potential out. With the confusion, if Porygon 2 hits itself here, with Indeedee locked into a non-damaging move, there is actually a chance that we can win this, depending on what's in the back. But unfortunately, it does not hit itself. The Tera Blast does come out, KOing Charizard and ending our chances of a comeback. My only attacking move is locked, as we saw in that previous turn, and you can see me here checking if all of my moves are locked. Imprison is obviously locked, Expanding Force is locked, and Trick Room is locked as well, so we do see that Indeedee had the Trick Room. The only thing that I am still able to do is click that Fake Tears. Obviously, without another Mon to take advantage of that, there's no way for me to win this game. But at least, you know, we get to show off the cool tech of us not having Prankster and being able to Fake Tears through the Psychic terrain. Although actually having Prankster here in this game would have been nice to get the Imprison off before the Choice Scarfed Indeedee. But unfortunately, we do not have it, so I am just going to concede. Shoutouts to that guy for having the same idea as me, just on a real Mon. I didn't know it at the time, but apparently Scarf, Imprison, Mel, Indeedee was a real set at points in Reg H. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But obviously, I got absolutely destroyed that game, but I thought it was still a really funny and interesting match nonetheless, so I wanted to show it. Even if it is an example of the crazy set I decided to run backfiring. This next battle is really interesting because my opponent also has a pretty wacky team with a lot of mons like Spiritomb and Metagross, who I look at and I am unsure exactly what they want to do, but I do see the Blood Moon Ursaluna, who obviously likes Trick Room, and while I'm not 100% sure, I do think Metagross and Spiritomb get Trick Room, so I decide to lead with Meowstic to see if I can stop that. They lead Hitmontop and Spiritomb, which is great for me if they decide to go for the Trick Room, because if they do, I can basically guarantee that I get this Imprison off due to Meowstic's Covert Cloak item, which will stop a flinch from a Hitmontop fake out. And I'm gonna go ahead and click Safeguard on Ninetales to try to prevent any Hypnosis shenanigans. Between the aforementioned Hitmontop fake out and Spiritomb being immune to a potential Meowstic fake out due to being a ghost type, I'm hoping they feel safe to go for that Trick Room if they have it. They do end up going for that fake out, actually targeting our Ninetales and stopping our Safeguard. We get the Imprison off, and Spiritomb does indeed go for the Trick Room, so our silly little strat works out again, but of course the work's not done. We are facing a Dark type here who is immune to our Expanding Force and also threatens us back with super effective damage, and if they manage to KO Meowstic, they'll potentially have an opportunity to set up Trick Room again, so we have to be careful about that. Here, the Hitmontop decides to go for Wide Guard, probably expecting a Heat Wave or something like that coming out from Ninetales. We get the Expanding Force off into the Hitmontop, putting it in range to be KO'd by the next one, and we actually try to go for the Encore here. But this does not work, because the way Encore works with Imprison is that, at least to my understanding, because Imprison went off, Spiritomb was unable to use Trick Room, so he never actually used the move even though he clicked it, and therefore Encore cannot lock him into that move. So that is a bit of a wasted turn there, and we do get hit with that super effective Dark Pulse like I mentioned earlier, so we're in danger of getting KO'd and losing the Imprisoned field effect and giving them access to Trick Room once again. They switch out Hitmontop here, probably to preserve Fake Out and Intimidate for later, and we get to show off a really neat interaction that comes with us not having Prankster on Meowstic. Dark types like Spiritomb are immune to Prankster priority moves, but we aren't Prankster, so we can actually hit the Spiritomb with Fake Tears, effectively doubling the power of Ninetales' Weather Ball. Honestly, it was more of a cool showcase than actually useful in this situation, because having a secondary attacking move like Alluring Voice on Meowstic probably would have been better in that spot to break through the Focus Sash, and Ninetales had enough damage to two-shot regardless, but we'll take the cool moment nonetheless. Even so, Meowstic has done his job this game. We stopped the Trick Room with Imprison and got their Trick Room setter to low health, so all we have to do here is KO both and we're golden. I go for the Heat Wave here with Charizard, and luckily I connect on both. But that was actually a misplay on my part because Heat Wave can miss. What I should have done was split my Weather Balls with Charizard's going into Ursaluna and Ninetales' going into Spiritomb. Since Heat Wave KO'd Ursa, Weather Ball definitely would have KO'd as well. My opponent also could have protected the Ursa to get in a faster Mon that can threaten my guys the next turn, or to get in that Hitmontop with Fake Out, but luckily they don't do that and we do hit our Heat Wave, so it worked out for us, and now we're in a position I feel good about. They decided to bring their Trick Room mode and we pretty much dismantled it with Meowstic. Of course, this game is not over. They still have that Garchomp in the back as a faster Mon in case their Trick Room mode doesn't work out. And in fact, Garchomp is faster than everyone on my team not named Meowstic, who is dead, and has potential to have super effective coverage against everyone not named Meowstic, who once again is dead. So my opponent has options here. We are going to switch out Charizard to preserve our main attacker here, going into Pelipper as we Terra our Ninetales into Terra Grass to resist a potential ground type move from Garchomp, or to take neutral damage from something like a Rock Slide that I thought was very possible here. Hitmontop Fake Outs into our Pelipper, and interestingly enough, it turns out that our Ninetales is actually faster than Garchomp, meaning they aren't max speed. So that is huge for us because Charizard now outspeeds without having to worry about Rock Slide, and we don't have to worry about a flinch stopping the Will-O-Wisp, which we do hit, and we're just in a great spot now. Funny enough, they do go for that Earthquake, and the burn actually saves Hitmontop, and with it having Fake Outed last turn and Ninetales being the fastest thing on the field, we can safely Encore it into the Fake Out. We go for Wide Guard on Pelipper to counter a potential Rock Slide or EQ from Garchomp, and Hitmontop actually retaliates with their own Wide Guard, which doesn't really affect us because we don't have any spread moves right now, nor do we really need to use any with Charizard, so we can go ahead and lock it into that move for basically the rest of the game. Garchomp going to go actually for that Fire Fang into the Ninetales slot, but because the rain is up, that is a bit of a surprising move, but we are totally fine because of the rain from Pelipper, and now we're just in total control of this game. We can pretty much just keep spamming Wide Guard to prevent the Rock Slide, which is the biggest threat to the Pelipper and the Charizard in the back. Matching the opposing Hitmontop's Wide Guard, obviously that's not really doing anything. We can just ignore the Hitmontop. Weather Ball gonna go out, do pretty good damage into that Garchomp. They are gonna KO us with the Dragon Claw, but with Charizard in the back, there's not much more the opponent can do. So Charizard is just gonna be able to come in. We click another Wide Guard, Hitmontop clicks another Wide Guard, and we are just going to be able to pick up that KO with Charizard with the Hurricane and clean up the game from here. Our last attempt versus Ice Spam didn't go so well, so let's give it another try. This Sunroom variant looks quite scary, with the speedy Lilligant and Sneasler alongside two threatening Trick Room Sweepers in Torkoal and Hatterene. But unlike the last Expanding Force team we ran into, this one is running female Indeedee, who does not learn Expanding Force, so we probably don't have to worry about any Choice Scarf shenanigans going before Imprison. Their Expanding Force user is actually the really slow Hatterene, who pretty much exclusively operates under Trick Room, and actually in testing, I ran into an Indeedee hat combo that was a big reason I opted to try no Prankster fake tiers to begin with. So I do have some practice in the matchup, and this could potentially be a great way for me to show off my prep. Their lead is exactly what I want to see with the aforementioned Indeedee hat combo, as we start off with Meowstic and Ninetales. I'm anticipating an Indeedee Trick Room, Hatterene Expanding Force here, so I'm going right for the Imprison on Meowstic and Weather Ball on Ninetales to start to get damage down. They end up popping the Terra turn 1, and I'm thinking, okay, is this Terra Psychic to buff Expanding Force? But it's actually Terra Normal, and so now I'm asking myself, why Terra Normal? Does Hatterene get Hyper Voice or something? Indeedee goes for the Helping Hand, and holy shit, she actually used Hyper Voice, and she moved before both my guys, so she must be Choice Scarfed. At this point, I'm stunned. The Grand Challenge is a place where you can see some very wacky stuff, but getting got by Choice Scarf, Terra Normal, Helping Hand, Hyper Voice from Hatterene was nowhere near my bingo card. In fact, it was so unexpected, I wish I could come up with a new saying just to describe it. At this point, we're only one turn in, but we've fallen pretty far behind, and needless to say, our position is not good. But we're not giving up yet, as we can go for the wide guard on Pelipper, knowing they're locked into Hyper Voice to buy at least this turn. And in general, we do have a lot of tools to deal with spread damage and Psy Spam. Tinkaton's defensive typing is very nice here. Pelipper has wide guard, as we mentioned, and we also have the Terra Ghost option on Pelipper too if we want to swing some momentum with an aggressive call that they'll stay in and Hyper Voice. They actually do stay in and go for the Hyper Voice this turn, which we will gladly block with wide guard, as we then go for the knockoff with Tinkaton. It does pretty okay damage into Indeedee, but more importantly, we get rid of that Citrus Berry. Indeedee, meanwhile, goes for Psychic into Pelipper, and we get crit. That does suck, but that Hatterene is still locked into Hyper Voice, and we do outspeed Indeedee with both of our Mons, so I'm gonna go ahead and pop the Terra Ghost here on Pelipper so that I can also attack with Peli this turn to try to put on a bit more offensive pressure in an attempt to swing for a potential comeback. Part of me was expecting they would switch here because they saw me show the wide guard last turn, in which case we just get some much needed chip on whatever switches in. But they do stay in, probably because they feel safe being as far ahead as they are. So the Terra Ghost play does pay off, as the Hyper Voice is going to phase right through Pelipper, and Tinkaton does also take that Hyper Voice pretty well with the Steel typing and naturally high special bulk, as Gigaton Hammer is going to be able to pick up the KO on Indeedee. I can then get off a Weather Ball with Pelipper, which shouldn't do too much damage, but... oh. You know what? That makes a lot of sense. The Hatterene turns out to actually be the Hisuian Zoroark, which in hindsight makes way more sense than whatever it was that I was thinking at the time. But I kid you not, in the moment, I did not realize what was happening until this point. Anyways, with their Sneasler in the back being as fast as she is and being able to KO either of my Gals from here, and my Gigaton Hammer being on cooldown this turn, there's not really much I can do to stop my inevitable defeat. If you're curious, I actually checked now, a couple months later as I'm recording this, and Hatterene does not actually learn Hyper Voice, and even with Max Speed Choice Scarf, it is impossible for her to outspeed my Meowstic or Ninetales, so I should have known turn 1. You could also say I should have known, because why would they go for Hyper Voice instead of Expanding Force? But I don't know, I thought maybe they wanted something to hit opposing Psychic types or something like that. Then again, if that's what they wanted, Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam would just do the job better, so once again, I should have known. Not that it would have made much of a difference this game probably, given I still got tricked from the get-go, but still. I also should have known because of the team preview, but I also don't really remember taking note of Zoro during the team preview, so I was probably just super tunnel vision on the hat and did not really consider that option, which, credit to my opponent, that was great. And versus me especially, because I had built Meowstic with hat in mind. It was just a cool concept too, bluffing 2 slow mons to instead blast them, or in this case me, in the face with Zoro, who's faster than a lot of the Reg H format. Also, Zoro is a sick mon. I actually tested with it a bit and considered using it for Reg H, given it can completely wall annihilate, for example, but unfortunately I never did use it. But once again, I got completely destroyed this game, but I thought it was a fun one, so I wanted to show it. Speaking of Zoro Hisui in Reg H, WolfClick actually popped off with one at Milwaukee Regionals, which is a nice segue into this next match headlined by yours truly, facing off against someone using the Wolfey BGC Reg H Parish team. For context, I hated playing against this team in testing, but I actually did have a decent amount of experience in playing the matchup. I faced a similar team with Lapras as their Parish Song user earlier in the GC that I clutched out that unfortunately did not make it into this video, and my good friend Jason, other member of the Moonlit Gaming channel, used the Wolfey Parish team during this GC also, so I had experience practicing versus him. Anyways, y'all may have seen the Pikachu earlier on in the video during the team previews, but he hasn't had a chance to shine yet, though we're finally busting him out right here alongside Meowstic. Meowstic of course has the anti-Trick Room stuff that we've seen all video, but Pikachu has something very important versus the trapping of Gothitelle that we'll see later. My opponent goes for a really interesting lead with the Kingdra and the Goth, threatening either to Trick Room with Goth and go into a slow mode, or switch out their Goth into Politoed to set the rain and activate Kingdra's Swift Swim to make him super fast. I could go for the Imprison to take Trick Room off the table, but that won't be super useful if they switch Goth into Politoed, so I go for a play that tries to cover for both, faking out the Kingdra to ensure that it can't kill anyone this turn, and setting up my own Trick Room. I figure if Goth goes for Trick Room this turn, my Trick Room would reverse it, but if they switch in Politoed, now their Kingdra speed would backfire against them. They don't go for either play unfortunately, as they just fake out with Goth, and now we're kind of in an awkward spot because without the rain up, both of their mons are now faster than ours under Trick Room. I think about reversing the Trick Room again, but I figure as long as Trick Room is up, it'll dissuade them from bringing in Politoed, which makes Kingdra a lot weaker. So we're instead going to try to get damage into Gothitelle, which is really important in this matchup. Kingdra luckily goes for Protect, maybe not realizing he's actually faster under Trick Room right now, as Gothitelle is going to fire off a Psychic into Pikachu. But Pikachu lives with literally 1 HP, that is insane, and we are able to get off a Volt Switch and switch out, even in spite of Shadow Tag, and keep the Fake Out for later in the game. I don't want to bring in Ninetales too early here and concede the Weather War, so we're going to go into Charizard, who is built to be able to function in the rain instead, as we get a nice Fake Tears off into Gothitelle. Side note, this actually would have been another situation where having Prankster would have been better if you're keeping count. But anyways, here's the other thing about this Charizard though. They don't know how my Charizard is built. So if they're just assuming that we're a typical Sun Charizard, I can maybe bait them into going into Politoed this turn. You can see me thinking about going for Fake Tears into the Goth spot for a potential switch in of Politoed, but I ultimately opt for a more middle ground play, going for Hurricane into Kingdra, which while inaccurate can still hit outside the rain, and trying to get damage down on either Goth or Politoed. They actually do go into the Politoed though, which is absolutely phenomenal for us, as we go for the Terra Water to cover for Weather Ball, or had Goth stayed in, the Muddy Water. Muddy Water and Psychic probably would have been a play that could have put me in a really rough spot had I missed the Hurricane, but they don't go for that, and as I mentioned before, the rain now makes Kingdra very fast, so under Trick Room, they're actually very slow. Crazy enough though, the Hurricane does not actually kill, which was wild to me. But this was also a mistake on my part, as I should have double targeted the Kingdra, and had the Hurricane been able to pick up the KO, then the Expanding Force would still be able to target the other slot. It also could have potentially been useful had they not switched out into Politoed and Hurricane missed, because we would still have gotten damage into the Kingdra. But instead, we do like -5 damage to Politoed, and Kingdra gets a big Weather Ball off into Charizard. Luckily, we still did enough damage for them to die to the Life Orb recoil, but the position could definitely be a bit better. Now Incin comes in, and with Kingdra out of the way, our whole team is now naturally faster than their whole team. So this is the moment to reverse the Trick Room, as well as go into Ninetales to reverse the weather. They do still have the option to knock off my Meowstic, which has the potential to KO me before I can reverse Trick Room, especially depending on the attack investment on Incineroar. But on the Weather War front, I really like how I position Ninetales and having the patience to get it in at the right time, knowing that it can be hard to win the Weather War versus Gothitel's trapping. Luckily, they go for the Fake Out Weather Ball into the Charizard, but Ninetales takes all of that very well, and now being able to reverse the Trick Room, we are in the driver's seat. My opponent did not have to Fake Out there because Trick Room was still up, and I think I would have been in a really rough spot had they knock off to my Meowstic slot, but they probably figured Meowstic wasn't super threatening in that moment and decided to ignore it, not considering the Trick Room reversal option. Next up, we go ahead and Fake Tears the Politoed, knowing how specially bulky it is, or to potentially catch Gothitelle on a switch in, and Encore to lock Incineroar into that Fake Out. Interestingly enough, Politoed also goes for the Encore, but apparently Encore doesn't work on Encore, so that's neat for us. We're just learning all of the niche Encore interactions today. But here, I'm now thinking both of these Mons want to switch out in this position, but with only one of them being able to do so, and Incin being actually useless here, I figure I would try to pop the Gothitelle on the way in on that Incin slot, but they actually prioritize winning the Weather War and switch out their Politoed instead. Of course, that means Incineroar is still locked into that Fake Out, which doesn't do anything, so we're still going to get value here, and that Fake Out misplay from a couple of turns ago is continuing to pay dividends. With a combination of Fake Tears and Weather Ball, we still do get pretty solid damage into Incin though. Now, for this next turn, we can completely ignore the Incineroar as we go ahead and target that Gothitelle slot instead. As expected, they do get the Incin out of there this time, regaining control of the weather, but we forced them to use up 2 turns to do so, so the momentum is on our side. They of course have the option to Fake Out here with Goth in order to slow us down this turn, but Goth does not go for the Fake Out actually, and if they go for the Trick Room here, maybe they can actually make something happen from this position. Gothitelle is going to live on a sliver like Pikachu did earlier, get that recovery on Citrus Berry, and goes for the Psychic, which I am fine with. Trick Room going up would have made it more awkward for them to go for a Perish Song, but Rain Boosted Stab Weather Ball is no joke, and with both of my guys in the back low health, the offensive pressure would have been kind of scary to deal with. it was maybe safer for me to go for Imprison that last turn, but then I lose out on very important damage on Gothitelle, and given how close that came to KOing, I imagine it was probably a roll to do so. In either case, it fortunately works out for us. They then actually switch in the Incineroar here as I launch a Fake Tears into Politoed, and I will gladly take the KO on the cat. They trade back with their own Weather Ball, but I'm feeling pretty good about this position as I can go into Pikachu, who, absolute GOAT, lived with 1 HP before, can neutralize a potential Fake Out from Goth here. On top of that, targeting Goth with Fake Out here can prevent any potential Trick Room, and with all of my Mons being faster, and Goth being in KO range from just about everybody, except for Meowstic, we've mostly neutralized the threat of Trick Room, and this time, we didn't even need to use Imprison to do so. Look at Meowstic, little guy putting in work even without the gimmick we built for him. Very proud of him. Anyways, they are going to go ahead and Terrastalize, putting the flower on Politoed's head, probably to get around any electric moves from Pikachu, and doing so after they've won the Weather War means they don't have to fear Fire Weather Ball in the process. Although we do still have the Hurricane on Charizard in the back to punish that. We stop Gothitel's Fake Out with our own Fake Out and do less damage than I'd like with Expanding Force as Politoed lets fly that rain boosted stab Weather Ball that I've been talking about, and as I mentioned, that move is strong, deleting over half my health here, but that means they didn't target Pikachu, and Pikachu being alive here is really clutch because now I can attack into a potential Protect into Goth while still keeping Charizard safe in the back. They don't protect with either of their Mons here, fortunately, so Meowstic is able to keep whittling away at this Politoed's HP, and Pikachu, this is not his video, but he's absolutely stealing the show here in this last battle, taking out the Gothitelle with Thunder, as they in turn take out Meowstic, who, shoutouts to that guy, because he's been sitting on the field being annoying since the very beginning of this game, which also is a play that makes sense for my opponent, because Terra Grass means he'll resist Electric-type moves from Pikachu. But Charizard is able to come in here, and it's definitely not looking good for my opponent, but I think their win con here is probably Protect to stall out the rain, and then hope for a Charizard miss, or that regular Weather Ball plus Alluring Voice does not KO, but they do not go for that, unfortunately, and Charizard is just able to close out this game. Out of curiosity, I did run the numbers versus -2 Spadef Politoed, assuming max Spadef, which if they were using the Wolfey spreads, that's not max Spadef, but calculating for the worst case scenario, Alluring Voice from Pikachu does at least 37.5%, and Charizard unboosted regular Weather Ball does at least 24. So as long as I clicked Weather Ball and not one of the moves that can miss, I think I still would have been fine outside of them hitting like 6 Protects for Leftovers recovery and me low rolling everything. But feel free to do the calcs yourself and let me know if I'm wrong. Anyways, you guys saw the Pikachu putting in work at the end there, and that is a little sneak peek of our next video coming out, featuring the world champion, the legendary Slayer, Mr. Ash's Pikachu himself. So if you're interested in seeing that video, please subscribe. It would mean the world to us. We're just a handful of guys trying to make our dreams come true. So if you like what you saw, please drop a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever else you do with videos these days, and follow us on our other social media pages, or check out our other YouTube channel. For those who are interested, I want to talk briefly about how I did in GC1 and reflect a little bit on the Meowstic strategy before I get out of here. In terms of how I did overall, I did pretty bad during GC1. I know my team was a little troll, but I definitely could have played a lot better as well. I was doing kind of okay for a little bit, and my record was 16 and 19, so close-ish to even, although my rating was mostly low. But I was hoping I could close strong, and then I proceeded to win only one of my last 10 games, which was actually that last game y'all saw versus the Wolfey Parish. The Meowstic strat was cute when it worked, and I think because our team was mostly relatively fast Mons, at least within the context of Reg H, we do naturally bait Trick Room. But there were holes, namely situations like that second game where the opponent just decides not to bring Trick Room. There's also the fact that Incin, even without any attack investment, is a roll to KO with knockoff if I don't commit Terra, which did happen to me once in a game that didn't make the video. If my opponent does manage to get Trick Room up also, then I'm just kind of screwed. Protect on Meowstic could have been cute too, to increase his staying power and lock the other team from using Protect, but at the end of the day, the strat is inherently kind of inconsistent, and I knew that. I was trying to take advantage of the best of one closed team sheet format of the GC a bit too, but we definitely could have done better. Still,
we learn, and in the next GC, I actually threw in a really slow mon that could operate under Trick Room while also taking advantage of the double weather shenanigans I had going on. Not gonna say what mon that is yet to keep a level of suspense, but it is another mon that doesn't see much play, but that I actually do think was kind of solid, and I did perform significantly better in GCs 2 and 3, so if you're interested in seeing that in the future or seeing what other mons I try and maybe fail to cook with, please subscribe. It would mean a lot, like I said earlier. Until next time.